I'll be your eyes, watching over you.
Trigger is finally here as our second limited Electro Stunner. Don't be misled though, she shares both element and role with Chingy, but they couldn't be further apart in gameplay. Chingy is taking up most of the field time out of stun, but she can set up some explosive burst. Trigger on the other hand is very much an inactive character that boosts your out of stun damage instead, letting you stay on your main damage dealer for almost the whole fight. And with the amount of agents in this game that want to be on the field for as long as possible, Trigger is an amazing option at both building days and boosting damage with little sacrifice. The general consensus so far is that Trigger is a very easy character to play with little thought needed. This is good in the sense that she's easy to pick up, but perhaps disappointing to some who wish she had more skill expression. If you're in that camp though, then rest assured, as Trigger has the potential for some crazy plays. And between quick swaps, Tartarus shot management, and making use of her sniper stance dodges for extra days and purge, there's a lot more to her than meets the eye. So let's first have a look at what Trigger can do. At first, Trigger looks like an AFK character. You build her gauge, swap out, and forget that she exists. But just like how Astra brought with her a lot of depth to the teams that she was used in, so too does Trigger with streamlined openers, some deceptively tight execution, and no shortage of style points. So let's break down Trigger's kit and the intricacies behind her moveset, as well as some interesting tech that can help you optimize her. After that, we'll touch on drive discs, stats, and vengeance. Then cover comps that she has good synergies with, and those that she doesn't. We can then talk about Mindscapes, as they can be a very big deal for Trigger, and show off some bugs currently affecting the character. Then last but not least, close off with one more short montage. So let's get this show on the road. We've got a lot of ground to cover. Trigger, like Sambi and Pokra before her, is an Aftershock character. For Sambi, Aftershock is just a tag that gets applied to an attack, so it's a little more than a gimmick to get Aftershock only buffs working with her specials. But Trigger is like Pokra, where her Aftershocks are when she, as an inactive character, comes in for an attack. Trigger's entire kit revolves around us, with her core passive and additional ability both working only on Aftershocks. Due to her additional ability increasing days on Aftershocks by up to 75%, a sizable portion of Trigger's days application comes from these attacks. And although her core passive says that it increases the stun damage multiplier, it does apply even out of stun, so you get a near permanent damage increase just for having Trigger in the party. As a quick refresher on the damage formula, the more you have of one stat, the less valuable it becomes. 100 multiplied by 2.5 gets you 250. But spread it across 3 stats, or 3 times 1.5 multipliers, and you get 337.5. Since we have no way of increasing the stun damage modifier outside of very specific characters, like Chingy's enhanced basic attacks, Trigger provides unmitigated damage increases to them, with very little, if any, saturation. Although, do keep in mind that as it's additive to the stun multiplier, it is a 35% damage increase when out of stun. But as enemies already take more damage in stun, an increase from 150% to 185% is only a 23% increase instead. And some few enemies, like Typhon and Marionettes, have 200% stun modifiers, taking it down to a 17.5% increase. As most characters do tend to save resources for the stun period, that means it's not quite as simple as a raw 35% damage increase on everything, but a silly competitive, unmitigated damage buff that sees a little saturation. Since this bonus is applied by Trigger's Aftershocks, let's break down how they work. When Trigger has her Purge gauge filled up, most attacks from other team members will proc a Harmonizing Shot on hit. This is Trigger's Aftershock. Whenever they are procced, Trigger will do 2 sets of shots before going off field. These shots don't build any energy, but do contribute to shock anomaly buildup. They also don't generate any decibels for the team, meaning its value is very much on the daze and damage that it provides. When activated, it will consume 3 points of the Purge gauge and has a 3-second cooldown between hits, which begins ticking from the moment that it is procced. Even though the cooldown is ticking during the animation, there is still a delay between shots. But when it procs, it's an instant hit, which can prevent enemies from being knocked back by keeping them in place. You can activate Harmonizing Shot with basic attacks, dodge counters, special attacks, dash attacks, and quick assists. You note there's a lot of attacks that don't count. Chain attacks, for example, don't proc Harmonizing Shot. Neither will perfect assists, nor the assist follow-ups from them. Ultimates won't do anything either. Even EX specials are not exempt, which is a problem for EXs with long animations. Sometimes though, TECHS will come up saying fire, and Trigger will perform 3 shots into a finisher. This is Harmonizing Shot Tartarus. It uses up a little bit more Purge, 5 instead of 3, but does more daze, more damage, and doesn't care about the 3-second cooldown. It procs on EX specials, assist follow-ups, and ultimates. But there's some caveats to it. It only works on the heavy attack portion of these moves. So Kaku's EX, for example, is the Wind Blow, which isn't a heavy attack. Her finisher, Fly the Flag, is considered to be a regular special, making it impossible to activate the EX special Tartarus with her. It also has to be done on the active character, so if you swap out of your EX special before the heavy attack hits, you won't get it. On the plus side, Tartarus has no internal cooldown with a regular Harmonizing Shot or itself, so you don't need to wait between shots. In fact, this can even be a problem, as you can interrupt Tartarus with itself if you're too fast. But it does have a cooldown. You can only proc them twice per move, with a 20-second cooldown tied to said move. So if you've already used EX special twice, you aren't going to be getting any more Tartarus shots. Each stack is independent of another. So in this example, we'll proc Tartarus straight away, wait 10 seconds, then proc a second. If we wait 10 seconds again, that's 20 seconds from the first Tartarus, so the cooldown from the first has expired, and we can get a third. But if I try to EX immediately after, I won't get a fourth, as the second one was still on cooldown. The fine print is quite important, as it's twice per move. So I can proc the first with an assist follow-up, a second with an EX, then a third with an EX again, then a fourth with another assist follow-up, and still get a fifth with an ultimate, and then a sixth with one more ultimate, all without 20 seconds having passed. It should be noted that it's only other characters' moves that can proc Tartarus. You can assist follow-up and EX special on Trigger, but nothing will happen. This means you're encouraged to perfect assist the Trigger first. She does have high daze build-up on her parries and follow-ups, but then you want to perfect assist it back to another character for Tartarus. You do get less days by perfect assisting on other characters, but Tartarus will often make up for that loss. Depending on who you're perfect assisting with, you can get a lot more days that way. And if you're getting perfect assists and follow-ups on your main damage dealers, that means more decibels for them, making up for the fact that Trigger's Aftershocks don't generate decibels. This is doubly important, because Trigger generates fewer decibels on her perfect assist than literally every other character, so it really isn't so bad to perfect assist with the rest of your team. So you can see how optimizing this can get difficult, encouraging you to weave in perfect assists and EX specials to always keep the Tartarus cooldown per move ticking. All of this is great and all, but how do we even get Purge for Tartarus? We've covered that Harmonizing Shots use up the Purge gauge, but we haven't covered what it is. It's reflected by the bar beneath Trigger's portrait, with the blue fill being Purge. No Purge means no Harmonizing Shots, including Tartarus. To get Purge, you need to perform attacks in the sniper stance, which Trigger will enter when you hold the basic attack button. For as long as you hold the button, Trigger will keep firing, building 25 Purge with each shot, up to a cap of 100. Let go, and she'll perform a finisher. The finisher itself doesn't build any Purge, doing just a little bit of damage on daze. But all hits of the sniper stance, including her finisher, build a little bit of energy and decibels. And although the finisher doesn't build Purge, it does bring up a quick assist prompt when it lands, albeit with a 25-second cooldown. This can be handy to maintain Astral Voice when out of stun, or applying the buff just before a stun. especially if you're running comps which lack a support. When in sniper stance, trigger will automatically dodge out of attacks with an 8-second cooldown. You can also dodge manually by moving to the side or backwards, no cooldowns involved. Although keep in mind that you can get hit out of it if timed incorrectly. These count as basic attacks rather than dodge counters, but are still considered perfect dodges and give you the associated decibels. The big thing though is that, unlike regular shots or even the finisher, these counter shots build a lot of everything. Energy, decibels, anomaly, and even days. And yes, this is after the hotfix for once. On a level 70 VR on the other hand, 4 shots in a finisher adds up to about 10 energy, 75 decibels, 220 anomaly, and 5 days. Whereas just one counter shot into the finisher builds 12 energy, 87 decibels, 310 anomaly, and 6 days, in addition to the perfect dodge and interrupt bonuses. Far more than the full volley. Since Trigger generates no energy or decibels from Aftershocks, her counter shots are integral to proper resource management. And you notice that counter shot still gives you 25 purge, just like a normal one does. It just keeps getting better. You may also have noticed that Trigger gets a dodge flash and counter shot as soon as she enters her stance, which is a little familiar if you think about it. Zhe Yuan is the current rerun, and although they're not related, are very much sisters when it comes to their dodges. You recall that when entering suppressive fire, Zhe Yuan will get a counter effect. The same is true for Trigger, where activating her sniper stance just as she's about to get hit yields a free dodge and counter shot. And this doesn't use up the automatic dodge either. Start mixing up stance startup dodges, manual dodges, automatic dodges, and you can start doing some pretty cool stuff, all the while building both purge and days. It should be noted that, like other ranged characters, Trigger does experience damage fall off the further she is from the enemy. But since her damage is almost all on Aftershocks, which have a fixed distance, this isn't something to worry about. And talking about Aftershocks, they are more than just Trigger's main source of damage. When I said that most of Trigger's Days application comes from Aftershocks, I wasn't kidding, as after factoring in her additional ability, well over half of Trigger's EX days comes from her Aftershocks. It's not much different for Ultimates, with just a little under half of all the Days application it provides coming from Aftershocks. We're jumping the gun a little here though. Neither EX or Ultimate are Aftershocks, so how come about half or more of their Days application can come from it? This is what we need to talk about coordinated support. When Trigger uses either her EX special or her ultimate, she'll enter the coordinated support state, which is indicated by her purge bar turning gold. This lets her proc Harmonizing Shot without consuming any purge, and more importantly, without restrictions. While a normal Harmonizing Shot has a 3-second cooldown between hits, there is no cooldown for coordinated support shots, and they can fire as soon as a previous shot animation is finished. Better yet, it also has no attack limitation. Any hit from any character other than Trigger will constantly proc it, including EX specials and lingering hitboxes. So whereas before you may have wanted to avoid using long EX specials as they wouldn't proc Aftershocks, now you're encouraged to do so, as Trigger keeps barraging the enemy until the state runs out. It even gives you shots without needing any purge gauge filled, although you go back to getting nothing after it expires. The duration and number of shots you get are dependent on the move. For EX Special, you get either 8 seconds or 4 shots, whichever comes first. For Ultimate, it's 12 seconds or 6 shots instead. If you use them in succession, the duration and shot count adds up to a maximum of 20 seconds or 10 shots. This gap is important to keep in mind. If you get 8 seconds and 4 shots of an EX, doing it twice means you get up to 16 seconds and 8 shots. If you do an EX into an Ultimate, that's 20 seconds and 10 shots, 4 from the EX and 6 from the Ultimate. But if you EX twice and Ultimate, you are still capped at 20 seconds and 10 shots. No different from just one EX and Ultimate. Another thing to be aware of is that Trigger won't use any Aftershocks while she's in her Special or EX Special. The same is true for Tartarus, so swapping early out of her EX isn't always a good idea. You might want to wait for Trigger's EX before swapping out in general, as the final hit allows you to reverse Quick Assist, which is great for astral voice management. The same is true for Ultimate, making Trigger function almost like a pseudo-support with her ability to constantly proc Quick Assists. If you do proc Tartarus during coordinated support, it won't use up a coordinated support count, but it will interrupt one if it's being fired. So it may mean that you lose out on a shot if it happens on its startup. So even though EX specials do constantly proc shots, you probably want to time it so that the heavy attack portion lands just as the coordinated support state is ending. Realistically, you aren't missing out on too much unless it happens to proc just as an attack begins, so it's not something you have to care about too much. Just try to make sure you're waiting until after trigger is done with her EX to use other characters as EX, as you at the very least want to be getting Tartarus Shots. And if Tartarus is on cooldown, you really don't have to care. The rest of Trigger's kit doesn't have much worth covering. Her regular basic attacks are really quite weak and not worth spending time on. Quick assists do let Trigger shortcut to her third basic, and the fourth basic isn't terribly bad. You can also go straight into basic 3 and basic 4 from a dash attack. But as Trigger's kit only buffs Aftershocks, you probably get faster days just by attacking with your main damage dealer while Trigger does Harmonizing shots. Her dodge counter though is surprisingly strong. Almost every guide and creator I've seen have set a leave dodge counter at 1. And indeed it's the least important of her skills, by a long shot. But that doesn't make it a bad skill, and in fact, it can be a really good way to optimize Trigger. Out of all the stunners, Trigger has the second highest days value on her dodge counter, behind only Kaleda. While Kaleda's dodge counter is quite slow and moves her towards the enemy, Trigger's dodge counter ends fast and keeps her in place, which allows for multiple consecutive dodge counters. Compare the days value for them, and doing just 2 dodge counters on Trigger is enough to completely smoke Kaleda, which takes more or less the same amount of time anyways. On attacks that allow you to do multiple dodge counters, this can be an effective way to build days very quickly. It also has a really long invulnerability window, which makes it very easy to spam. And in case you're not aware, trying to do a perfect assist on a red flash leads to a dodge counter, not a quick assist. Even better still is that you can go from a dodge counter straight into a sniper stance counter. It does do a little less days than a dodge counter, but it's still plenty high. If anything, it's better to go into a counter shot given the purge, energy, decibel and anomaly application that it provides. We've already covered how you can get an instant counter shot on the sniper stance activation, but there's a few more things worth mentioning. First, you're free to swap out of Trigger at any point in the sniper stance. So if you've already used up the quick assist prompt from the finisher, there's no need to hang back and wait for her to fire. Normally, if you swap out of Trigger, she will instantly cancel her actions and go straight into a finisher. So if you try swapping out of Trigger just as you go into the sniper stance, she won't perform any regular shots. But this changes with counter shots, as they take priority and will always execute in full. This can be useful, as it lets you build Purge with barely any time commitment on Trigger. And as Aftershocks take priority over the sniper stance, any hits you do will interrupt the weaker finisher and have Trigger get right back into doing Harmonizing shots. On longer fights, like in Deadly Assault, you're guaranteed to run out of Purge before the fight ends, which would force you to swap back to Trigger and refill her gauge. But by combining red flash dodges with sniper stance counter shots, you're not only constantly refilling Purge as you use it, you're also getting plenty of extra energy, decibels, and days on top. Just be mindful that Aftershocks can also interrupt counter shots. So don't be too fast when swapping out of Trigger, else you miss out on all the benefits that it provides. If you want to stay on Trigger for more than a few milliseconds, there's some more tech that can help you out. And that's the ability to dodge cancel out of sniper stance. Trigger has animation locks on her finisher shots, stopping you from using any other skills, like an EX special. Given that it doesn't build any purge and isn't particularly high in days, it's only ever worth waiting for it if you get a quick assist. But so long as Trigger hasn't started the finisher animation, you can dodge cancel out of sniper stance at any time. Which means you can go from sniper stance straight into an EX special. Or even sneak in the dodge counter before the EX. You don't need to dodge cancel out of sniper stance for a clean opener though. To go into the sniper stance, Trigger has to perform a regular basic attack, which can be cumbersome. And once Trigger gets into the sniper stance, she's locked into her initial direction. No matter how much you shift your camera, she'll keep shooting at the same location. Even if you try using manual side or back inputs, she will not change her aim. The HUD is just for show. You don't really get to control who she fires at, no matter what you do. Only counters will retarget, locking on the closest enemy. If the sniper stance has no target though, then doing a side input will also cause a retarget. So if you can time the side input to happen just as the enemy spawns, you can start the fight building Purge, no basics needed. It also just looks really cool. Although admittedly it's such a minimal time save that it's more for style points than anything else. But there are some more practical uses of skipping the basic attack to enter the sniper stance. When swapping to a character normally, they will just take the place of your existing agent, coming in just slightly to their right. If the character is currently on screen, you're locked out of them, and the game does not let you swap back until they've fully retreated. If that was the case of Trigger, it'd be impossible to swap to her, given how she's always on screen. So instead, if you swap to her, you just take over her existing position as she's using Aftershocks. This can be a bit disorienting at times, and if you swap too early, you interrupt her Harmonizing shot. But it has its benefits. First, doing this is a shortcut to Basic 3 and Basic 4. So you can get a little bit of extra energy in days before dodge counters or going into the sniper stance. And second, it lets you go straight into the sniper stance. Unlike the faster counter shot, Trigger takes a very long time to do her finisher in sniper stance. If you try to attack her right after, you're nearly guaranteed to interrupt it with Aftershocks. But since Aftershocks have a 3-second cooldown, this means you can swap the trigger, activate her finisher, and then swap to your third character without interrupting anything. You can keep juggling back and forth, getting a little extra energy, decibels, and days of every swap, which can add up over the course of a run. This can be a bit impractical though, as it needs to be timed around Trigger's Aftershocks, making it quite cumbersome. But depending on which comp you're running, it can slot nicely into stun rotations, which makes it more consistent. Just keep in mind that you can't swap back to your original agent, as they're still on field. But if you can find places to slot it in your rotation, then it's a handy way to seamlessly go into the sniper stance and build Purge when needed. And if you have both Trigger's EX and Finisher quick assists ready, by combining both, you can get up to 2 stacks of Astral Voice before stun. But why only get 2 stacks of Astral Voice when you can get all 3? When Trigger fires a finisher, it's the beam that procs a quick assist. And quick assists lead to Aftershocks, which lets us swap the trigger immediately. Which means that if you swap out of Trigger as soon as a finisher lands, but then swap back to her while it is still hitting the enemy, you can get it to proc another quick assist. With how long the beam lingers, the timing is quite lenient. If we combine with some of our previous tech, we can run Trigger with Astral Voice in Anomaly comps and get 1 stack from her EX and 2 from her finisher, making it really useful for burst. Swapping mid Aftershock is also especially good if you want to build Decibels in comps without other Electro units. Trigger can build a lot of Anomaly, but she cannot proc it via Aftershocks. If you try to swap at the end of Trigger's Aftershock, that won't do anything. But timing the swap just as an attack lands will give you an instant shock proc. And that means Anomaly attribute Decibel bonuses. Even if you mess up the timing though, a single shot of the sniper stance is enough, making stance dancing pretty important if you have no other Electro agents that could proc Anomaly. Or you can just go for an EX and let the final hit connect, as that will proc it too. Overall though, a lot of these are optimizations that you won't want to be doing all the time. Trigger doesn't need this advanced level of execution to do well, and in fact can even do better if you don't use them. When I was labbing routes on Unknown Corruption Complex with Yuan and Nicole, Trigger's dodge counter into counter shot on beam had me overflowing in energy and days. But that meant I was stunning too fast, losing out on early days and decibels from a leg break. If instead I just spent that time doing damage with Yuan and Nicole, I'd get a lot less energy and days, but much faster leg breaks, which in practice led to even faster stuns and better decibel sync. With a Yanagi team on Typhon, you can use some of these techs to build plenty of resources and red flashes without overcapping shock and interrupting the boss. But in Sambi comps, you want her to be getting dodge counters for her mark, so swapping to Trigger is a bit of a waste. Of course, you still want to optimize red flashes where possible, but it's far from necessary for good Trigger performance. So don't take these techs as gospel on what you should do. Instead, add them to your repertoire and look to integrate them when it makes sense to do so for a given fight or team comp. Even without all these optimizations, Trigger is more than pulling her own weight. And to make sure that she was, I decided to do a few Inferno retests, as it allows you to see the damage breakdown of your team. I used Sambi, Trigger, and Nicole, and had only 1 damage Rosonia, which gave 35% damage on shielded agents, and the only way to get it was via perfect dodges, which I only got with Sambi. This was quite annoying to do, as the boss has frequent invulnerability phases that cause my burst to miss, so I'd restart if the run didn't go well. But even with very simple play, Nicole was renowned for being one of the strongest supports in terms of raw damage contribution, was getting 6 to 8% team damage. Trigger on the other hand was getting 13 to 15%. On one of the runs, I decided to time coordinated support to land during the stun period to maximize damage instead of stun. That gave me 19% team damage instead. That's a quarter Sambi's damage being dished out by Trigger alone. And that's with Sambi getting Rosonia buffs and not Trigger. So Trigger does more than just apply days and buff her team. She's almost a sub-damage dealer of sorts. Granted, Trigger was using Shadow Harmony for these tests, which does give her a damage edge over Nicole. And the drive discs Trigger uses can matter quite a bit. What to use on her varies a lot. If your crit rate isn't at or very near 90%, you're better off using 4-piece Shadow Harmony. Since it provides up to 12% crit rate and trigger gets stays from crit, it's a no-brainer. It both increases trigger stun application and damage dealt. If you still can't make it even with a 4-piece Shadow Harmony, then you want to be using 2-piece Woodpecker Electro to make up for it. Crit is just that important. If you do hit 90% crit without Shadow Harmony though, then it gets more muddled. Shockstar Disco buffs basic attacks, dash attacks, and dodge counters, and that's almost all of Trigger's days. You may recall that all Aftershocks and Sniper Stance attacks, countershot included, are basic attacks. Standard dodge counters are really strong on Trigger, and they get buffed too. And unlike other stunners who want to always perfect assist, a move which gets no buff from Shockstar Disco, that isn't the case for Trigger, who's happy to let her team do them instead. And don't forget that half of her EX and ultimate days are Aftershocks. So Shockstar's lack of bonus for assists, EX, and ultimates doesn't matter as much. Sure, running 4-piece Shockstar means no combat attack from Shadow Harmony, and Trigger does do a lot of damage on a team. But if not using Shockstar means you miss out on an extra stun, then the total damage loss is going to be a lot greater than any personal damage Trigger might contribute. In fact, considering that Trigger's core passive only applies to Aftershocks and would provide 18% more days from Shadow Harmony's 12% crit rate, you could argue that running 4-piece Shockstar is better even when not a 90% crit, given it gives 20% days to all basics, dash attacks, and dodge counters, more than just 18% on Aftershocks. But stun thresholds is all that it comes down to. Impact and days are useless if it doesn't lead to another stun. It should either help line up stuns with resources or give an extra stun before a fight ends. But if not, then it really isn't doing much. And that does open up some optimization routes. You can try to make sure to only use EX and ultimates early in the stun, so that all of the coordinated support shots contribute to days build-up to get an extra stun. Or if you know that you won't be getting an extra stun, you can use EX and ultimates late, so that your coordinated support fires during the stun period instead. In Shield defense, stunning faster can lead to better times. With how Trigger enhances out of stun damage, it may not even be much consideration. But when building Trigger, you should always, without question, prioritize getting an extra stun over personal damage. Just about missing out on a full stun window's worth of burst will unequivocally be worse than missing out on a bit of extra Trigger damage. But if you can hit the 90% crit threshold without Shadow Harmony, and you're not getting any extra stuns from Shockstar, it's most likely that Astral Voice would be her best in slot. The combat attack percent from Shadow Harmony is nice, but 12% combat attack on Trigger is not going to be as much as 24% damage bonus on an Anomaly or Attacker agent. You could run Protopunk, I guess. It'd work well for the out of stun damage, but if you can maintain Astral Voice, then that'd be better. In summary, run 4-piece Shadow Harmony if you're not at or at the very least close to 90% crit. If you are, then Shockstar can help you sync your stuns better or get an extra stun. But if it doesn't do that, then Astral Voice is your best bet. As for the 2-piece, Woodpecker if you need the crit, Shockstar if you need the impact, or Swing Jazz for more energy to feed coordinated support. Technically, you might get marginally more personal damage from another 2-piece, like Astral Voice, Thunder Metal, or Brunch on Blade, but remember you get no energy from Aftershocks, so the energy regen from Swing Jazz does go a long way. More EXs means more Aftershocks and more Decibels, which also means more days and damage. Stats are a lot less complicated. Impact percent on D6 is a no-brainer for a stunner. Trigger's damage is good, but nowhere near high enough to warrant an attack percent disc. Impact applies to all of Trigger's moves, and her passive's days increase scales with it, so this is a non-negotiable slot. Since Trigger gets no elemental damage percent bonuses, and you can't roll them on substats, it's likely going to be her least saturated stat, so that's the D5 pick. You can run attack percent too, and even pen percent, but you will want to avoid pen percent if you have her signature Wension. And regardless of whether you do or don't have Trigger signature, you're likely going to be running crit rate on D4, else hitting that 90% threshold isn't going to happen. Debuffs, like Nicole's M6, don't help here, as you need that crit rate to be reflected in the stat sheet. And this lack of crit rate is a big reason why Trigger's Wension is so good for her. Without it, any of the drive disc recommendations are pointless, as you'll likely be stuck with a 4-piece Shadow Harmony and 2-piece Woodpecker Electro. There's more to it than that though. Trigger's Wension is the best Wension you can get for her role, and it's not because of the impact percent bonus effect. Remember that Trigger is so valuable in large part because she doesn't saturate other stats, and her Wension doubles down on this. It provides a near permanent 25% Death Shred on the enemy. But unlike other stats, which get worse the more you have of them, Death Shred, like 10%, gets better the more you get, scaling with itself. This is also the reason you don't want to run 10% on your D5 if you have the signature engine. Death Shred and pen ratio are multiplicative with each other in a negative way. Think about it like this. If an enemy has 1000 defense and you shred 20% of it, it has 800 defense left. If you then apply another 20% from pen ratio to it, you're left with 640 defense, not 600. So if you couple her signature Wenjin with an electric damage percent D5, it's almost a 20% increase over the other A rank options. And that's total team damage, not just personal damage. Which reveals a wider problem. Supports have incredibly strong A rank options, like Kaboom the Cannon. Anomaly characters can fall back on Electro Lip Gloss. And attackers have gotten plenty of event Wenjins that can help. Heck, for the majority of attackers in the game, Brimstone is still a competitive option. So even though in theory, Sambi's Wenjin provides a greater increase than Trigger's does to a Sambi, Trigger, and Astra comp, it does require you to be able to maximize the rotation to draw out that benefit. Whereas the combination of Daze Buildup, Death Shred, and increase of Trigger's personal damage with zero thought or effort required means that Trigger's Wenjin may end up being better in practice. To be fair, Chingy's Wenjin also demands zero thought or effort and is incredibly strong on Trigger. Some rudimentary checks showed it to be only 5 to 7% worse than Spectral Gaze on a Sambi, Trigger, and Astra comp. In fact, considering that Trigger keeps attacking during the stun period, she's even better at using Chingy's signature than Chingy herself. The buff from Ice J Teapot runs out after 10 seconds and requires constant upkeep with multi-hits. Even if you swap to Chingy mid-rotation, it wouldn't be enough to maintain it. But Trigger gets that for free, so it can be a very competitive option if you happen to have it on hand. Considering her multi-hits, you can even use Lighter's Wenjin, Blazing Laurel, and it'd be a very strong option for Fire and Ice teams. It does mean a slight change in playstyle though, as you want a perfect assist with Trigger instead of other characters to refresh the impact buff. As for other Wenjins, they aren't particularly good. The Restraint can be okay, as its damage and daze increase bonuses apply to Trigger's Aftershock, and so will have nearly permanent uptime. It does say the effect can only proc at most once during each skill, but Trigger attacks twice for every Aftershock, and from testing, it's building 2 stacks for every Harmonizing shot, so it ramps up fast. When it comes to A rank options, Fossilized score is okay. It's better for Shiyu, and can do well for 20,000 point scores in Deadly Assault, but it gets worse the higher you go. Steam Oven on the surface is a fair bit worse than Fossilized core, but the energy region can be a big help for providing extra EX specials and coordinated supports, which, if managed well, can allow it to keep up. Box Cutter isn't too good, as its damage bonus is physical only, and the 16% daze increase is going to be outdone by Fossilized core and Steam Oven if properly managed. With so few A rank or non-limited S rank options for Trigger, you may even be tempted at just using a crit rate Wenjin from another row. But considering Trigger's score passive scales with impact and applies only to Aftershocks, you're probably going to be better off running a Stunner Wenjin instead, so that all of your days gets buffed. You may have noticed that Hellfire Gears is absent from those recommendations, and that's because its energy region applies only to off-field characters. Considering Trigger isn't the active character, you'd think that means she's off-field, but that's not the case. This is where we need to make a distinction between active, inactive, and off-field. An active character is one you're currently piloting. Every active character is going to be an on-field character. An off-field character is one that does not show up on-field. This is your whole party backline when not in use. Bernice is a prime example of a character that can do damage off-field with her afterburns. But inactive characters are those that are visible and on-field, but not currently being piloted. Astra is the most obvious example, but so too are Trigger and Poker during their Aftershocks. What this means though is that any off-field effects don't apply to Trigger while she's performing Aftershocks, making it a pretty bad Wenjin option. Although standard banner Wenjins are not great for Trigger, you can actually help other characters use their Wenjins. Normally, characters will chain attack around the same position as the character that procs the chain. But with Trigger, she'll instead come from the opposite side of the activating character. So if you're behind the enemy and proc a chain, she'll move to the front, and future characters' chains will come from that new position. But if you're in the front of the enemy and proc a chain, then she'll move to the back and set your team up for back attacks. It doesn't work for big bosses like Corruption Complex, as it just places her in front. Typhon is also pretty big, so it's more of a side shot than a back one, but it's very useful for practically every other boss, which is very good for Steel Cushion and Nekomaru's M1. You could run a Billy Trigger team. Considering his M2 increases his dodge counter damage and M6 ramps up with every perfect dodge, this makes him a pretty strong on-fielder that appreciates Trigger's out-of-stun buffs. And he also works well with Steel Cushion, so Trigger's repositioning sets him up for strong burst. Zhiyuan and Trigger can be a bit difficult to play at M0, but if you have M1 Zhiyuan and can sustain shot shells out of stun, they complement each other exceedingly well. Considering that Zhiyuan has an evasive assist, this means you can get red flashes into Trigger, then perfect assist back into Zhiyuan on the next red flash, ensuring you get Tartarus Shots from assist follow-ups even on enemies that don't have many parryable moves. Poker can do this too, so she's great as well. And when it comes to supports, Nicole is arguably one of Trigger's best partners. Remember how Death Strike gets stronger the more you have? Well, Nicole provides 40% of it freely. To be honest though, almost all supports work incredibly well with Trigger. Kaboom the Cannon is one of the strongest engines in the game, but it has tight maintenance requirements, as stacks only last 8 seconds. Since each character provides their own stack, this means you need to swap to your stunner mid-combo to maintain it. Trigger's attacking every 3 seconds though, which means a 100% uptime on her stack, both in and out of stun. If you run her with a character like Astra, then you can have 3 out of 4 stacks up constantly. Not to mention that unlike some pairings like Astra Caesar or Astra Lighter, Trigger doesn't have to worry about stat saturation, making an Astra Trigger shell very desirable for most comps. But you don't even need to run support. You could just as well do Trigger and Caesar with any attacker. Caesar has one of the best perfect assists in the game, which links into a very low-cost EX special, so that pairs well with Trigger's Tartarus Shots. And since she gets a heavy with her EX special and its follow-up, you can get double Tartarus Shots very easily. And in case you have her signature, you're also getting at least 12% extra days being applied to all team members, Trigger included. You can run her in a Seth and Jane team. Seth's also got good perfect assists, not to mention that bouncing between Seth's and Trigger's quick assists means easy build-up of Astra voice stacks and high uptime on Jane. Ellen's a greedy on-field attacker, and Trigger lets her do that freely, so you could do an Ellen Lycan team and she'd do great. Zambi is the obvious pick, and the team Trigger is made for. Zambi likes to stay on field, and Trigger enables that. Zambi likes doing out-of-stun damage, and Trigger enables that. Zambi boosts Aftershock damage, and Trigger is enabled by that. It's in large part due to these buffs that she can pump almost 20% in team damage contribution. It does mean Trigger takes a very passive role, as rather than trying to get in with dodge counters and counter shots, you want to feed these to Zambi instead, which in turn also makes it incredibly easy to play with a low skill 4 but really high damage. Of course, let's not forget Yanagi. They activate each other's additional ability. And Trigger should do very well in Anomaly teams, get no small part of their damage in the out-of-stun period. But there are some Anti-Synergies to keep in mind. Trigger is deceptively good at building Anomaly. Her Aftershocks come frequently, so it adds up over time, and this is bad for Yanagi since it means her Anomaly is diluted. If I have Trigger and use EX and ult, then do more shock buildup from her coordinated support, shock Anomaly damage is only taking for 25,934. If instead I just stay on Yanagi, getting only Trigger shots every 3 seconds, the Anomaly damage takes for 31,720 instead, a fair bit higher. Since you're always running crit rate on D4, there isn't really an option to run Anomaly proficiency. Granted, Trigger's damage increase more than makes up for this. If I just attack normally, I'm now doing 21,526 damage instead. Even if it didn't, the faster time to stun would. So they do pair well together. But it does mean you need to be a little bit more reserved in using counter shots on Trigger. In runs of Zhiyuan and Nicole, the latter of which can almost feel like an Anomaly character with how fast she applies ether, Trigger was single-handedly keeping up with both of them when making use of counter shots in terms of Anomaly buildup. In theory, an Evelyn team could also really benefit from Trigger, given how much of a field hog Evelyn can be. And with how much stat saturation either Lighter or Astra bring to a team, Trigger makes for a good filler pick if you're using these agents elsewhere. But because Trigger needs heavy attacks from EX specials, you pretty much lock yourself out of Tartarus Shots on Evelyn, unless you detonate her EX, which isn't a good idea. Even more than character-specific issues are element-related ones. Every team's effectiveness is determined by their encounters, and fire-weak bosses are usually electric resistant. And in case you're not aware, you don't just do less damage to resistant enemies, you do less days too. Running Trigger in a Yanagi Benice team would be great, as Benice has really easy ways to proc Tartarus with Tap EX, as well as coordinated support with Hold EX. And Soldier 11 would love to have Trigger in the team, given how she likes attacking on field, but if it's against electric resistant enemies, maybe not so much. This can change with time though, as more bosses are released with different weakness spreads. So Trigger can either be incredibly strong or underwhelming, depending on the enemy. One thing that won't change though is the damage formula. In theory, Rena can be a very good character for Trigger. Their additional abilities work with each other. Rena's EX lasts a long time, which can be useful at proccing coordinated support shots. And this tech to still get its delayed heavy attack to work with Tartarus, which can open up some pretty cool combo rounds. With Rena having evasive assists, she can proc Tartarus shots from red flashes, so she can be great if you aren't using Trigger signature. Running Trigger with Chingy can be a way to effectively speedrun to the stun period. But since Chingy increases the stun damage percent modifier, she's the one character that saturates Trigger's bonus. Not to mention that you may end up stunning too fast to get 2 of Chingy's enhanced basic stun, so they both suffer. We've already covered how Tartarus shots do nothing on Sokaku's EX. And some characters like Harumasa or Zhiyuan, when lacking their M1s, can really struggle with Trigger, as they don't have much they can do in the out of stun period. Although, given Typhon practically stuns himself and so does Corruption Complex, it's not too bad. Just not as good as it can be with their Mindscapes. And on the topic of Mindscapes, Trigger's Mindscapes are quite interesting. M2 is just a team-wide damage bonus. M3 and M5 are just a bit more personal damage and days to Trigger. And the other Mindscapes though can fundamentally alter the way in which you tackle encounters. It's hard to overstate how incredibly strong Trigger's M1 is. It's a little bit like Astra M1, where the difference between Trigger with and without can be quite significant. The raw damage bonus is incredibly strong. It's increasing Trigger's core passive by over 50% in value, taking it from 35% to 55%. But we're not interested in the damage numbers. The big deal here is the cooldown reduction in Aftershocks. Given that most of Trigger's days buildup comes from Aftershocks, the increased frequency means faster stuns, and more anomalies, which also means more decibels. With M0, Trigger can just about get 5 stuns on unknown Corruption Complex, but is not really able to capitalize on it. With M1 though, it's practically guaranteed. So look beyond the damage numbers, because M1 can streamline routes in ways that aren't visible in a spreadsheet. M4 can be both very good or very bad. It interrupts enemies, and that's great. But it interrupts enemies, and that's bad. Typhon will always do a red flash attack string before going into a parable one. But if you interrupt him, then he won't do it. So by getting M4, you've locked yourself out of using EX and ultimates outside of stun in this fight. But if managed well, it can be very useful at interrupting his jump. M6 is straightforward in a sense. It's damage, but it's also a lot of damage. Like a truly absurd amount of damage. You don't get many uses of it, as it requires a lot of purge to be spent. But as you start with max stacks, it transforms her into one of the strongest burst damage dealers in the game. But that's a very steep cost for a bit of burst every 2 minutes. Most people won't ever care for this. What you likely will care for though, are bugs. Thanks to Orange Oldfish for letting me use these clips, which highlight that Trigger can get hit during Aftershocks. Invulnerability just drops at the end of an Aftershock. If you're not careful, then Trigger can lose almost all her health in a single attack. And Trigger's ultimate is also lacking in invulnerability at the end, so it's unsafe. Trigger's dash also seems inconsistent when it comes to proccing dodge counters. Usually it can trigger dodge counters just fine, but too often have I been hit during it when coming out of stance. Lastly, this is less a bug and more like a feature, but still worth knowing. Normally, you're free to rotate the camera as you attack with your agents. But if Trigger performs an Aftershock, she will lock your camera in position. And if you happen to be turning away, she will force you to look at her. For someone who's blind, she really wants you to keep your sights on her. We've already gotten 100 polychromes for bug fixes, so who knows? Maybe Trigger will gift us some more. All in all, Trigger is a really cool character. I think a lot of people underestimate her too. She may not provide Astro or lighter level buffs, but she offers a lot more than just numbers. Just being able to constantly on-field your damage dealers means they get a lot more resources, not to mention how surprisingly effective Trigger can be at stunning and generating decibels. It's difficult to quantify the benefit that she provides just by looking at a sheet, because so much of what this character contributes is something you don't notice until you try her out. And part of that is how easy she is to pick up, with a very low skill floor, where you can just fill her gauge, then set and forget. But she also has the potential for a lot of skill expression, but with Tartarus shot management or integrating dodges and the sniper stance into your game plan. It isn't always optimal to do the cool techs, but I think that's a good thing. Players shouldn't be expected to always have flawless micro to perform. I've gotten no shortage of comments of people saying that they won't be playing Harumasu due to how technical he can be. Trigger, on the other hand, is a character that rewards knowledge and execution, but certainly doesn't make it mandatory. It's figuring out when and where to integrate these advanced plays into a fight that is the real form of skill expression. And that, I think, is quite fun. I hope you've enjoyed this trigger guide. Just because she isn't an active character doesn't mean that there isn't any complexity to her kit. And if you like these in-depth breakdowns of character kits that focus on execution, or videos on niche techs and even game mechanics and fundamentals, then do like, share, subscribe and ring the bell. I've got more videos coming. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time.